The ending to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has been divisive online, but it's also kind of confusing. There's multiple theories out there on what's actually happening, and I want to take my stab at it about a month after the game's come out. So let's look at the ending of the game and try to make sense of it. Our starting point is going to be right after Aith gives Cloud the fake, and yes it is fake, black materia. The first thing I want to emphasize and explain is the idea of a multiverse or alternate timelines in this universe. I do believe we are dealing with different timelines, but it's all through the live stream. Sephiroth flat out tells us this line in the game.
The planet encompasses a multitude of worlds, ever unfolding. Some quickly perish, while others endure.
Now, while Sephiroth isn't the most reliable source of info, he does tell the truth from time to time. And this, I believe, is very true. There's multiple worlds existing, living, dying, but all contained within the planet. We'll come back to the other important line that Sephiroth tells Cloud later in this video. Okay, the first big scene I want to look at is Zack having to make a decision. He has 3 choices, but we're presented with 2 of them. Go to Reactor 6, save Biggs, or go to Shinra HQ, talk to Hojo, and heal Cloud. Zack chooses the path on the right, but the most important thing here is what happens actually to the left path. We see a burst of light and what I'm going to call rainbow colors. I know they're called different things online. This is very important as it'll later be told to us that this is creating a new timeline based off of a decision, or in other words, when fate is breached. Okay, so next up, let's look at Cloud and Aerith's date. This is originally structured to potentially bait players into thinking we're in Zack's world with the Aerith and Cloud that are sleeping, knocked out. But this is actually not true, and the easiest and first indicator is their clothing and even their hairstyles. They're not the same. So right now, at the time, we've seen 3 timelines. Now, we're going to skip the actual date itself, but focus on the key moments that helps us understand the story and what's going on. The first interesting line is Aerith explaining where they are to Cloud.
Let's just call it a dream. My dream, to be precise.
What the hell are you...
Shh. Just play along for a bit, okay?
Now, this is an interesting way of putting it, but I read this as Aerith trying to keep Cloud at ease and at least try to have a little fun, not that this is a legitimate, just a dream of hers. Next up is when Aerith tells Cloud to not look up, as he won't like what he sees. Cloud still does this out of curiosity and sees a break in the sky. Now, this even connects to the original Final Fantasy VII, but for the purposes here, we're just going to say it signals that it's a world on the brink of destruction, meaning the world is basically doomed. It's also important to bring up here that Zack's world we've been seeing throughout the game also has the same deal going on, and it's in the same situation. Now, here's where there's multiple cuts, and they start happening pretty quickly. We see Zack at Shinra's HQ, and what's important to note here is the start of the theme that whichever path Zack chooses, whichever it might be, leads to his death. He says he's got nothing to lose, everything to gain, goes in for the attack, and that's the end of that pathway. Back to Aerith and Cloud, we're immediately met with some important lines from Sephiroth.
So this is where you've been hiding, in a world that has accepted its fate.
Hey, what's that?
Let's go see.
Just as you must.
That line is pretty powerful and honestly kind of scary, and we'll talk more about it later. But what we can focus on is Aerith hiding. This is important due to the white materia that this Aerith has, and that the current timeline, which we've been playing through the entire game, she does not. It would be important to note here that there's already been plenty of hints that Sephiroth and Aerith are aware of past and future events and even different timelines, and this is another tell. This Aerith is able to, at least in part, either communicate or just be aware of her other selves in their circumstances. Next up is choice number 2 from Zack, going to Sector 6 reactor to save Biggs, again showing the same thing. This was choice 2 of 3, and this results in his death as well as Biggs. We'll now skip to the third choice from Zack, which basically isn't really a choice. He's basically picked Aerith in this, but he's actively debating who to help, until Sephiroth walks by him. Zack wants to fight, but Sephiroth is there for Aerith, not for Zack. Now, the biggest thing here is Sephiroth displacing Zack, right? He sends him into a void of some sort, but take note of the rainbow colors again as Zack is floating down. This is now branched out into a new timeline. Another observation is the forces in play here. First, we see black whispers controlled mainly through the game by Sephiroth, but then white light breaks in. We see white whispers and a flower. These have generally been controlled by a mix of Aerith or the Cetra throughout the game, and they clearly are leading Zack on a path. Okay, now the end of this part. Back to Aerith and Cloud, where Aerith gets closure on their relationship. While it's a beautiful scene, I do want to focus on a few different parts. One being this line.
Whatever happens, don't blame yourself.
The thinking here is she knows what's going to happen to current timeline Aerith and is getting Cloud ready for that impact. This ultimately is not going to go according to that plan, but I feel it's Aerith covering her bases for what's about to happen. She then hands Cloud the white materia and tells him that this entire thing is not about her, but saving the world as well as Cloud. She hands him the materia. We see the ground change to the rainbow beam of light again, which is important. She pushes Cloud into the portal, and he falls back, and we see Sephiroth walk in. Now, my opinion here is a few different things. One, this is clearly the end of that Aerith, but it's also important to remember that this is not the Zack World's Aerith that we had just saw. As I said before, there's alternate outfits, but also Sephiroth is walking in without his sword in his hand here, while when he sends Zack into Oblivion, he has a sword in his hand as he opens that door. All right, now we're back to Sephiroth's exposition dump, but I do want to focus on two main things here. First is this line.
When the boundaries of fate are breached, new worlds are born.
Here's another example of, in my opinion, Sephiroth telling the truth. We don't necessarily even have to take his word for it, as we've seen it with Zack multiple times now, including even in Final Fantasy VII Remake when he lives. Clearly, making a big alternate decision does create a new timeline. We don't need Sephiroth to even tell us that. But the reason I'm focusing on this so much is it's going to come back in a big way with Aerith. The second aspect I want to focus on is because Sephiroth is catching Cloud up, we can pretty confidently put the pieces together to figure out Sephiroth's ultimate plan. There are worlds where alternate endings occur. Whether he wins or loses in the main timeline, there's the problem of the rest of the timelines. His main line through this entire game has been Reunion, which I believe will be the third game's name. Much like in Remake and even in Rebirth, Reunion has more than one meaning. But the main one, I believe, is the reunion of timelines, making them all one and then winning it all for good. I think Aerith sadly knows this as well, and this will come back up at the very end for what I believe her plan is. Okay, now we see the first glimpse of somewhat surprising Sephiroth. Cloud arrives at a forest with clear signs of the life stream. Now, I'm not 100% sure if we're physically back in the main timeline from Rebirth, but what's important is a few different things. Number one, Sephiroth tells Cloud that shouldn't be here, meaning the white materia. This world's Aerith doesn't have it to summon holy, at least not yet. But shortly after, Cloud does run into Aerith, where she stresses to focus on himself. Much like the Dream Timeline's Aerith, I believe this is another and maybe the final attempt from Aerith to brace Cloud for what's about to happen, with her not really knowing what's going to happen. Focus on yourself, find the real you, things like that. At the end of this scene, Cloud gives Aerith the white materia, which Aerith appreciates, and she gives him the empty materia. Another sign that this Aerith knows of different timeline Aeriths and was working to get her a new white materia after she used hers at the end of the last game. She disappears and Cloud starts to come to. Okay, now we're going to skip to when Cloud walks through the bright entrance into the Forgotten Capital. Now, I just want to say here, it's very possible the alternate timelines and cuts that Cloud and us as players are about to see coming up could very well be because Cloud walks through this and has a heightened sense to them. It's also possible it's because of the Mako in his bloodstream, or even a mix of the two, but I do find it interesting he's the only one that walks through this, and he'll see things that no one else can see. Now's the big scene, and there's quite a bit to go through. First, let's look at what Aith is saying as Cloud is walking up to her. To me, this comes across that she very much wants to see if there's a different way for things to work out. She clearly likes Cloud. She just told him that, right? She's asking for help. She wants to protect her friends. And the answer to her question is still she will have to die. Cloud walks up to her, and we go through much of what happened in the original game, although with an immediate difference that this time, it's the Whispers that are controlling his sword, trying to get him to kill Aith, versus the original when it was Jenova/Sephiroth. Then we get the big scene. Sephiroth drops down, ready to kill Aith, and this is where the big split of opinions online come. Cloud blocks Sephiroth's strike, deflects it, and the sword lands in the ground, with Sephiroth seeming fine that it just happened. But let's look at that scene very closely. First, when Cloud's sword comes up, it's lighting up green, but it's only green. When they strike, there's a bright light, but it's hard to make out anything else there. But then the most important part, when the camera is zoomed in on their eyes, we see the rainbow color again. And even more so right here. To me, without going any more forward with this is the frame that's the most important. It's clear that Cloud did block his strike, deflect it, and ultimately create a new timeline in the process, one where Aith does survive. We continue to see the sword in the ground and the rainbow colors behind it, but then the camera shifts, we see static, and then we see blood. Aith dies, but the colors around them remain. We then go back and forth between static shots until Aith touches Cloud and tells him it's okay. All right, now's where things get really confusing, but I want to just throw it all out here right now. I believe Aith of this timeline we've been playing, the majority of the game, has been killed. Cloud was just a second too late. He's holding the dead body of Aith, as evidenced by Barrett and the rest of the group seeing that. They see blood. They see Cloud putting her hand to his face, not her doing it by herself. However, let's talk about what Tifa sees. Tifa was exposed to Mako earlier in the game, and I think giving her a new sense she otherwise wouldn't have. She sees both very, very quickly, but ultimately, she does see the dead Aith at the end. Cloud sees Aith alive. Now, it's also important to differentiate Aith being alive and Aith being one with a life stream. Honestly, both could be similar things. She dies in this timeline, allowing her to have a Force ghost-like form, let's just say. This could very well be the Aith that's talking to Cloud, saying that it's all okay. No matter which scene you look at and have a debate of, I do believe regardless, Aith does survive in a different timeline, at least she does for now. We also find out that Sephiroth is aware of Cloud's confusion right away, saying that he'll never see the truth with such clouded eyes. The rest of the cast is experiencing anger, rage, and so on, but Cloud isn't. This is also shown through a brilliant gameplay feature as the boss fight that begins right after. Every character in the party has their limit break full. Everyone except for Cloud. This is because they're emotionally charged. They're in a heightened state, ready to fight, while Cloud isn't. Okay, so we're largely going to skip this 10, 11 stage boss fight and just focus on the main scenes that happen in between them. The first being Zack finding his way to Cloud. We again see signs of rainbow lights before Zack touches Cloud and is then transported to him. They fight Sephiroth, win the fight, but Sephiroth immediately separates them, sending Zack away. As Zack is falling, he yells to Cloud this.
Cloud, save her!
Which is also pretty interesting. It makes sense that Zack would only know what he knows. He doesn't know if Aith from Cloud's world is dead or not, but I look at it almost from a larger sense, almost like the developers talking to us. I feel like he's saying as a blanket statement, save Aith. We'll skip more of the stages of fighting and get back to Zack, who arrives in Aeth's flower patch, sees a meteor falling, and echoes really what the audience has been saying this entire time. What the hell is going on? I'm assuming he was sent back to the world we've seen him in throughout the game, right as it's about to be hit by the meteor and destroyed. Now we jump to Cloud, who is alone with Sephiroth, and this might be the most important line that Sephiroth says all game. Let's watch this scene.
Let's end this. Together.
Now, a few things to talk about. Firstly, I believe this is an alive Aerith. I've seen speculation that this is live stream Aerith, and that's possible, but I look at two indicators here. One, she comes from a rainbow-colored portal, which is, say, the portal that Cloud, or like a portal that Cloud was pushed through earlier on, indicating that an alive Aerith from a different timeline opened a portal to join Cloud. And also, Sephiroth's line of what I believe being genuinely surprised by this. I don't think he'd say that to a live stream ghost. Remember, he's okay with Aerith being dead. It's not her dying in the original game that ruined his plan at the end. He can really go either way, but he'd much rather her be dead than alive. And also the idea of alternate timelines. He's going around killing Aeriths left and right. We see this. So I believe this is an Aerith that survived and is alive, which he wouldn't want, it would actually be surprised by. The camera also makes a point of showing her hair up as she's walking through the portal, whereas the Aerith we see dead and just left, and even the one with the live stream with the green colors behind her, has her hair down. All right, next up I think is a very important line from Aerith that I believe shows Cloud did save her in one timeline. Let's listen to it.
I saw what you did back there, Cloud. Thank you.
Thank me later. This ain't over.
Right. Okay, let's finish this.
I see what you did back there, Cloud. Thank you. What did Cloud actually do for her? He talked to her, he laid her to rest, but nothing there really screams you need to be thanked for if he didn't save her. But he did. He blocked the sword, saved her life, and that's what I believe she's thanking him for. Now, Sephiroth immediately taunts Cloud, asking what he makes of all this, if it's a dream or not, to which Cloud says his tricks won't work on him anymore. I think there's a play here from Sephiroth, but we'll talk about that towards the end. Sephiroth is defeated and leaves knowing that this isn't fully over yet. Aerith sends Cloud back to his timeline in a very similar back-to-back situation we've seen before in, say, Advent Children. We're sent back to Zack really fast as the meteor is about to strike and he's going to die, until the ground breaks beneath him and he's transported somewhere else again, and also again with the rainbow-colored beam. Back in the main timeline, we see more camera shenanigans. Tifa and the gang see Aerith on her side, as seen here. Also with the green life stream in the background. Cloud sees white whispers, the same green life stream, and Aerith laying on her back, just as he left her. When he does get closer, we see the rainbow colors yet again, and Cloud tells her to wake up, which she does. All right, now we see the aftermath. One important thing to note right away is we do not see the burial of Aerith, which, Cloud lowering her in the water. I believe this has happened, but Cloud has no memory of doing it. The first big moment after that is static, and Cloud seeing Aerith die. I believe this is the events of the timeline that they're in trying to show itself. But before he can get too lost in it, we see Aerith, who will show them off. Now, we jump to a Rufus scene after this, but I don't want to focus too much on it other than to highlight Sephiroth clearly has a plan he wants him to run with, while Rufus is becoming more and more aware of it all, which he says. The Wutai versus Shinra politics will be more prevalent in part 3, but I really want to focus on Cloud and the gang for this video. All right, last time we see Zack here, he wakes up in a not destroyed church with the flower bed. I agree with Zack that none of what he went through was a dream, but let's listen to his last lines.
Just as worlds unite, so too do they part. But who's to say they can't unite again?
I believe this will be pretty important for the next game, as it kind of even sets it up. Zack isn't gone. He will be back, and it's possible Aerith would maybe even be with him. All right, we now have the end of the game cutscene, and a beautiful one at that. Some big things to notice, though. We see Aerith through Cloud, seeing her. The first big moment is her touching Red 13, and him sensing her to the point of saying her name out loud. He can't see her, but this all makes sense, with the experiments done to him in mind. Next up, Cloud is looking at the clear materia ball, putting it in his pocket, and picking out the black materia. Firstly, I want to just point out, you can hear a clink when he puts the first ball away. It didn't transform or become black materia. He had both in his pocket. Now, you could ask, where did that black materia come from? Didn't he already give it to Sephiroth? Well, we were told by Aerith that the earlier black materia was a fake, And although Cloud didn't believe her, that actually was the truth. The true black materia was hidden, and I believe that Cloud got it either when Aerith woke up and left the group, or when they were battling Sephiroth at the end. It's very possible that Sephiroth already planned for this outcome as well, and Cloud will still deliver it to him up north in the third game. The next big thing is Cloud telling them to not look up, that it's an illusion, and to not freak out. This is a moment where I don't believe that Cloud is crazy. He's seeing the beginning of the end, a planet close to destruction, and I believe he's able to see it through his experiences in the last hour and a half of the game. The rest of the gang can't see it, but it is there. Cloud tells Tifa and Barrett where he believes Sephiroth is, how he can handle the pressure, and they get on the plane. Then we get the last goodbye. Now, there's a lot going on here. Let's listen to this part.
You gonna be okay getting back?
And if I said I wasn't? Don't worry. It's like a second home.
I guess.
This is double meanings that Cloud doesn't really realize, and this connects all to what's really going on. So let's get into and let's finish up by explaining Cloud's mental state right now. He asks if she'll have trouble getting back, and she says it's like a second home. There's some miscommunication going on there, mainly on Cloud's end. Aerith is returning to the life stream, not going back to the Forgotten Capital to pray, which is where Cloud thinks she's going. She'll just stay there. In short, the main snag to Cloud is this. He thinks this timeline's Aerith is alive, that he blocked the sword, and she's sitting there next to him, seeing them off, and is staying behind. He's partially right. He did block the sword and save Aerith, but this is not that timeline's Aerith. The Aerith he's communicating with could be a combination of an alive Aerith and a life stream Aerith. As I said earlier, both would generally be able to do the same thing. Life stream Aerith should be able to follow Cloud around, help him out, talk to him, but so could technically a different timeline's Aerith, albeit probably not as often. This is both a good and bad thing for Cloud. On one hand, he isn't processing what just happened, like Tifa, Barrett, and the rest of them. You can imagine in the third game them being sad and being reflective of, of the situation, while Cloud shakes it off because he thinks she's alive, back there. Eventually, this will backfire, and that's where I think Sephiroth is fine with either outcome. Aerith is alive in a different universe, yeah, but she's dead here. Cloud thinks she's alive here. That can be used against him. You could say, why doesn't Aerith just tell him the truth? And I think we've already gotten signs of Aerith's plan. It's more of a slow game. She repeatedly tells Cloud to focus on himself, don't blame himself, etc. We see Cloud having static visions, and then he's pulled back because Aerith is there. I believe she's stopping the full-on collapse of his mind, especially because it would be too early for that to happen, and maybe even impossible to bring him back. I believe she thinks this is the better outcome, not to mention that she's clearly able to still help Zack bounce around in this state. To wrap this up, we get the final lines of Aerith and Cloud. Aerith saying she'll stop the meteor, and Cloud will stop Sephiroth. He even promises her this, although seconds later we see the line, no promises await at Journey's End, implying there's still a potential for the good guys to not win this. All right, that's all for the video. I have more thoughts and theories as to what will happen in the third game with Aerith, Zack, and others, so let me know if you want to see that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed and all that jazz, and I hope to see you all on the next one.